Peter Cole is both a singular and a plural poet. Singular in that he has evolved from his early projectivist poems in rift, rigorous word-by-word inquiries, to the blazingly original voicing of his last several books, Things on Which I've Stumbled and The Invention of Influence. Plural in that he has allowed himself to be possessed by many voices, medieval Hebrew and Arabic, modern Hebrew and Arabic. It's not only that he has translated so mesmerizingly the Hebrew poetry from Muslim and Christian Spain in The Dream of the Poem, and centuries of lyrics in the poetry of Kabbalah, as well as, to name a few of many names of poets he's translated, the Palestinian poet Taha Muhammad Ali and the Israeli poet Aaron Shabtai. He has opened his eyes and his ears to centuries of poetic forms and has distilled that rendered listening, his phrase, into his own distinctive yet multivocal lyrics. The many makes us the one we're becoming, as he chants in Open for Business, one of the new poems in the Kabbalistic splendor of Hymns and Qualms, new and selected poems and translations, the book we celebrate tonight. There's a sense in Cole's poems of constant becoming, a resolute art of quest and principled irresolution. What is so distinctive about this art? An art he calls, also in Open for Business, a disciplined sort of insouciance. Peter Cole sounds like no one else writing in English today. He revels in triple feet, dactyls, and anapaests. Gone is the griffin, the phoenix, the fawn. But he roughs them up so they lilt but don't lapse into nursery verse. He's not afraid of rhyme, off-rhyme, end-rhyme, internal rhyme, constant ligatures and multiplications of sense. So business rhymes with isness, rhymes with mess. Cole has changed the rules and made rhyming radical. But these technical matters of cadence and rhyme are micro-maneuvers in a larger campaign. Suffusing all his poems is the Kabbalistic sense that letters not only have power, but are powers. With the alphabet, as a late antique anonymous poem proposes, God created the world, 22 figures of longing in a single body bound. Peter Cole extends Genesis in a bountiful fervor of word games, puns, anagrams, writing on the wall, a mystical Scrabble. Very serious play. And the plurality? As he describes it in Hymns and Qualms, presents a double helix, translations and so-called original poems wound round each other page by page. As though living itself were an endless translation, he suggests in On Being Partial. He explores this drama of debt and filiation most deeply and painfully in the long poem, The Invention of Influence, largely represented in this book, Hymns and Qualms. The poem dramatizes the fatal relationship between the young psychoanalyst Victor Tausk and his mentor, Freud, a relationship that culminated in Tausk's suicide and Freud's embarking on his study of Thanatos. Tausk's research on a psychotic delusion of an influencing machine gives Cole the negative model of ideal literary composition. The language we speak, the language we seek, is the language spoken. Our words emerge from beyond, within. Only someone of Cole's toughness of mind would embed this tragic tale of tradition and influence in the heart of a collection of brilliantly influenced poems, poems that claim and refashion their traditions, undaunted, unashamed. Hymns and Qualms twines the ancient and the contemporary Jewish tradition, a tradition saturated in the search for justice. That search resonates in these pages, in poems that cry out in protest at the agonies of current Israeli politics, a cry by a poet who has lived most of his adult life in Jerusalem. They are his agonies. Peter Cole's work is a kite, trailing a long tail of prizes, a MacArthur Fellowship, a Guggenheim, an award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and many others. But the kite soars above such worldly fetchings. Let's listen to Peter Cole.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Rosanna, for that elegant boost of an introduction. I feel taller, or my hair does, something like that. It's a tremendous honor to be reading at the Y and with Laura and before all of you. I love reading, so I'm going to jump right in, cut to the chase, and begin with a poem that I started scribbling across the park on the Upper West Side maybe a decade ago and finished in Jerusalem. It's a poem that could be about a day at the office, or in a relationship, or listening to the news, or Kabbalistically about the creation and maintenance of the cosmos. Song of the Shattering Vessels. Either the world is coming together, or else the world is falling apart. Here, now, along these letters, against the walls of every heart. Today, tomorrow, within its weather, the end or beginning's about to start, the world impossibly coming together, or very possibly falling apart. Now the lovers' mouths are open, maybe the miracle's about to start, the world within us coming together, because all around us it's falling apart. Even as they speak, he wonders, even as the fear departs, is that the world coming together? Can they keep it from falling apart? The image gradually is growing sharper, and now the sound is like a dart. It seemed their world was coming together, but in fact, it was falling apart. That's the nightmare. That's the terror. That's the Isaac of this art, which sees that the world might come together if only we're willing to take it apart. The dream, the lure, isn't an answer that might be plotted along some chart, as we know the world that's coming together within our knowings, falling apart. So that poem is really a kind of deep translation of a Kabbalistic myth that I'd been working with for a long time as I was putting together a volume and translating a volume of Kabbalistic poems. And that's really how most of my work takes shape, really for a long time now, in conversation with creation and recreation, or as I think of it, recreation, hymns and qualms, originals and translation, all of it moving along a spectrum from writing as translation to translation as writing. To write is to translate. It will always be so, even when we're using our own language. Is not me, but Jose Saramago. So tonight I'm going to try to bring you into that larger conversation I've been having with myself and centuries of tradition. We're going to travel far and wide, as I say, centuries, continents, languages, so seat backs and tray tables up, and I hope the connections will become clear. For instance, we'll start at one end of the spectrum, or we've already started, but we'll go to one end of the spectrum, a straight translation. From this end of the spectrum, I'd like to think you can see the whole of it. This is a poem that was originally written in Aramaic, between the 2nd and the 7th centuries of the Common Era. We don't know, either in Babylonia or in Palestine. We don't know who the writer is, but he was clearly part of a group of mystics who produced a body of literature known as the Merkavah literature, or the literature of the chariots. For me, it's a kind of poet's creed, and by way of connection to the modern, it might help to think of Emerson's saying that all language is vehicular. To rise on high and descend below, to ride the chariot's wheels and explore in the world, to wander on earth and contemplate splendor, to bask in the blessing of the crown and sound glory, to utter praises and link letters, to utter names and behold what is above and below, to know the meaning of the dead, to know the meaning of the living and see the vision of the dead, to ford rivers of fire and no lightning. And this next poem also contains visions of the dead and lightning of a kind. There's also a chariot, a merkava in Hebrew, although the meaning of merkava in this poem has morphed kind of hideously to mean tank, as in military tank. It's a poem about the 2014 Gaza war, and it's called Through the Slaughter, or I call it Through the Slaughter because A, there was one, and B, it's written through another poem called On the Slaughter by the great modern Hebrew poet Chaim Nachman Bialik, who in 1903 responded in poetry to a pogrom that was carried out against the Bessarabian Jewish community of Kishinev, current-day Moldova. So there's a kind of historical or conceptual rhyme of horrors or atrocities here. But beyond that, I bring the Bialik poem to bear on the situation in Gaza because the Prime Minister of Israel did. A kind of strange move. In a few months before the war, or a few weeks before the war broke out, 3 Israeli Jewish teenagers from the West Bank were kidnapped, and it was presumed that they were killed. In fact, they were killed. And Netanyahu went on TV and held a press conference and quoted misleadingly lines from this Bialik poem as a call for revenge. And as I say, several weeks later, he then unleashed the full force of Israel's firepower from on high on the largely civilian population of Gaza. The word flechettes shows up in the poem. Flechettes are kind of missile or grenade that are fired from tanks, from these Merkavot, and they release thousands of tiny darts, metal darts, that fly through the air in like a 100-meter wide cone that, again, can, the idea being to inflict maximum damage on the nearby population. So at the beginning of the poem, through some of the middle, and especially at the end, I've woven bits of the Bialik poem, so that's why it's through his poem, and especially when you hear about revenge, that's Bialik. Through the Slaughter, and Bialik. Sky, have mercy. When flechettes fly forth from a shell shot by a tank, taking Ezekiel's chariot's name. When their thin fins invisibly whiz, whiffling the air like angels' wings, their metal feathers guiding them in. When their hooks rip through random flesh in a promise of land with its boring sun, is it like the priest's release in Leviticus? The male without blemish and dashed blood, the limbs in pieces, the tents of meeting, the burnt offering. Does it hasten deliverance or summon presence? Is it savor pleasant as the rage unfurls in a storm of flame and the darts deploy in a cone and a shawl of pain? Does it soar like justice, contain a god, expose a source? What will is known? Does it touch a throne? Can we see a crown? As the swarm scorches the air with anger and the torches of righteousness extend their reach, what power is power? Whose heart gives out? When skin is pierced to receive that flight, what light gets in? What's left of sin? What cause is served? What cry is heard? When the blood of infants and elders spurts across T-shirts, does it figure forever as it wreaks its change and seeks revenge above the abyss? Could Satan devise vengeance like this? War which is just, an art of darkness. Have mercy, skies. And here's a poem that's also about slaughter and also has a prime minister in it. But this one with a very different valence. It's from the 11th century, Muslim-ruled Spain. And it's by one of the great poets in all of post-biblical Hebrew literature, Shmuel Hanagid, who was the prime minister, kind of unbelievably, the prime minister of the Muslim state of Granada under a Berber king and also the Jewish leader of its Muslim army. The poets of this period were, in a way, writing through Arabic. They were translating in a deep fashion the poetics of Arabic classical poetry and grafting that onto a biblical vocabulary and a Jewish mythopoetic universe. So every poem, every word in the original Hebrew poems are taken, every word is taken from the Bible, but used very, very freely, often to mean the opposite of what it says in the Bible. And at the end of this poem, which is called The Market, and will be about a market, is about a market, kind of markets you've seen all over the world, no doubt. At the end, he cites a line from the book of Ecclesiastes, but in a completely different sense. I crossed through a market where butchers hung oxen and sheep side by side. There were birds and herds of fatlings like squid, their terror loud as blood congealed over blood and slaughterers' knives opened veins. In booths alongside them the fishmongers, and fish in heaps and tackle like sand, and beside them the street of the bakers whose ovens are fired through dawn. They bake, they eat, they lead their prey, they split what's left to bring home. And my heart understood how it happened and asked, who are you to survive? What separates you from these beasts, which were born and knew waking and labor and rest? If they hadn't been given by God for your meals, they'd be free. If he wanted this instant, he'd easily put you in their place. They've breath like you and hearts which scatter them over the earth. There was never a time when the living didn't die, nor the young that they bear not give birth. Pay attention to this, you pure ones, and princes so calm in your fame. Know if you'd fathom the worlds of the hidden, this is the whole of man. And now two much quieter, simpler, but not all that simple poems. The first is mine, and the second is by a marvelous mid-20th century Hebrew poet named Leah Goldberg, who was born in Lithuania and then came to Palestine and Israel. She died in 1967. Both poems attempt to bridge sort of tremendous gulfs that are right in front of us all the time. My poem mentions Philo, an Alexandrian philosopher who wrote in an allegorical interpretive mode around the time of Christ. And Goldberg's has no title, so I'm just going to pause between them and put them together. Every single person you meet, Philo wrote, it said, everyone is fighting a very great battle, except that no one is able to find where he said it, or what he thought the burden might be that brings it on. Still, it's almost certainly true. And so he added, perhaps, be kind. Have you seen the rain? We are calm. 3 angels from an ancient story are moving slowly between the trees and homes. Nothing has changed. Only the rain is carefully hitting the stone. The street is glassy. We see how 3 angels are crossing the street from an ancient story. The flower is pure. The door is open. The rain is quiet. The miracle has already happened. Another kind of slow motion miracle, marriage. This poem is called Valent Lines for A, and it's a Valentine for my wife, Adina, whose books many of you in the audience know. Valent Lines for A. What law and power has blessed me so, that in this provocation of flesh, I have been wedded to gentleness. delicacy of an intricate mesh of our thought and meals and talking has brought me to this exaltation of syllables and to speechlessness, to December dusk and desk and skin in the amber of our listening. Dawn again pink with munificence, heart again blurred by its ignorance. Toward you in that equation I turn, and you in turn involve our being spun like wool from which soul is weaving a use for that useless opulence. Doing and making, the end served by what it is we make, and what we do is what has made me, making, and you. Unless we paint too rosy a picture of such things, here's a poem from the 14th century, back in Spain, but now under Christian rule, Toledo, written by a man named Yaakov ben Alazar, and I gave it the title, Spats and Squabbles. Day after day, spats and squabbles. Time stands still, and still we wobble. Are we alone in this torturous state? Do all lovers share this fate? Love like a neighbor for his neighbor says, my friend lacks all savor. Without the tension, without the tussle, love and poems alike are dull. Being led, L-E-D, although there's a pun in the poem on L-E-A-D. We're still in the family dynamic here, in a kind of productive tension. And this is a kind of pop-up poem. It's about something that was lying around for a long time, and then came to my consciousness. And the poem itself, after I wrote it, I put away for a very long time. And then as I was putting a previous book together, somehow I found it in a folder, and out it came. Being led. As I write, I'm being led by matter older than I am, but from the place where I was born. A yellow pencil on which the words, again the leader, 1946 Chevrolet, Patterson, New Jersey, have been engraved. The eraser, however, is less than useless. Using it only makes matters worse and blurs what appears on the page. It surfaced somehow not long ago. I found it among my father's papers. The pleasure it affords is strange. So this feeling of being led, as Rosanna said, is sort of runs through a lot of my work. And I think one of the most amazing places that writing and translation has led me to is the work and person of Taha Muhammad Ali, the Palestinian poet born in 1931. He died 7 years ago, a total autodidact. Grew up in the Galilean village of Safaria near Nazareth, and that was destroyed in 1948. And after that, he went back to Nazareth after a year in Lebanon and set up shop as a souvenir salesman. He spent his whole life running a souvenir shop. This is a poem of his called Abdul Hadi Fights a Superpower. Abdul Hadi is a character who shows up in a lot of Taha's poetry. He referred to him as a kind of Arab everyman. Today we might find him in a refugee camp in Amman, or in refugee camp in Greece, or maybe huddled in a basement in the suburbs outside of Damascus. Abdul Hadi fights a superpower. And the word labda at the end is a kind of cheese made from yogurt. In his life, he neither wrote nor read. In his life, he didn't cut down a single tree, didn't slit the throat of a single calf. In his life, he did not speak of the New York Times behind its back, didn't raise his voice to a soul except in his saying, "Come in, please, by God, you can't refuse." Nevertheless, his case is hopeless, his situation desperate. His God-given rights are a grain of salt tossed into the sea. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, about his enemies, my client knows not a thing. And I can assure you, were he to encounter the entire crew of the aircraft carrier Enterprise, he'd serve them eggs, sunny side up, and labna, fresh from the bag. And a strange kind of, political or cultural twin of Taha's is another poet that Rosanna mentioned, Aaron Shabtai, who is still with us, alive and very much kicking. He's a poet I've worked with really since I was in my early 20s, and I'll read a poem called Passover 2002, but of course it could be Passover 2018. It was about the Second Intifada, but it applies now, and in 10 days it will be Passover once again. This is a mythic situation. Observant Jews for Passover to make their pots and pans kosher, immerse them in boiling water. Instead of scalding your pots and plates, take steel wool to your hearts. You read the Haggadah like swine, which, if put before a table, would forage about in the bowl for parsley and dumplings. Passover, however, is stronger than you are. Go outside and see. The slaves are rising up. A brave soul is burying its oppressor beneath the sand. Here is your cruel, stupid Pharaoh dispatching his troops with their chariots of war, and here is the sea of freedom which swallows them. Another chariot. So just two more poems. From one kind of madness to another. Rosanna told you a little bit about the invention of influence in Victor Tausk, figure who, not sure why he sort of took over my life for a little while, but just there was something about Tausk's talents. He had a quality that I think is really important essential for good translation and really for all good writing, and that's a kind of extreme receptivity. In this case, unfortunately, it's about receptivity kind of gone wrong. Tausk was a marginal figure who specialized in the margins. He took on unsolvable or seemingly unsolvable, untranslatable, as it were, cases, in particular schizophrenics, who were hearing voices, who felt that they were being controlled by voices that were coming to them from outside. Of course, they were coming to them from inside, although curiously, Freud, like Saramago, wrote once that our native tongue is foreign because, in a way, it's been implanted in us. So these schizophrenics felt that they were being controlled, as I say, by these outside forces. And in the psychoanalytic literature of the day, and even before that, that dynamic or that process, that phenomena became known as the work of an influencing machine. And the parallels to literary tradition, I think, are obvious. If they're not, just think of another doctor from across the river, across the Hudson, who early in the 20th century talked about poems as machines made of words. So this is the first poem in the first section in that long poem, The Invention of Influence, and it has an epigraph from Tausk's last posthumously published essay, 1919, called On the Origin of the Influencing Machine in Schizophrenia, and it says, the following considerations are based on a single example of the influencing machine complained of by a certain type of schizophrenic patient. It's a machine, said the doctor, of a mystical nature, reported on at times by patients. Their knowledge notwithstanding, witnesses are able to offer only the vaguest of hints as to how the heirloom functions. It makes them see pictures. It produces thoughts and feelings and also removes them by means of mysterious forces. It brings about changes within the body, sensation and even emission, a palpable kind of impregnation. So one becomes a host. For some, it's driven by faint effluvia derived from human breath. For others, electric charges are sent directly into the brain. It's born of a need to explain the cause of things inherent in man. Certain factors are always involved. Enemies, displaced erotic tension. Boundaries are called into question, as though one's thoughts were given and knowledge implanted from beyond, so what's within is known. One does nothing on one's own. Strings are pulled and buttons pressed, all to evade an anxiety that rears its head at the heart of the void. In avoidance, the echoes begin. The cure is illness. The illness is cure. Thus the revolving door that becomes a lament for the makers and for those who fall prey to the powers of this most intricate machine. And I'll end with a Whitmanian poem that was written in Yiddish in the 18th century by one of the great Hasidic masters, Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, and it's called The Song of You. Lord of the world, Lord of the world, Lord of the world, I'll sing you a little song of you. You, you, you. Where will I find you? And where won't I find you? So here I go, you, and there I go, you. Always you, however you, only you, and ever you, 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 you. East you, west you, north you, south you, 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 the heavens you, earth you, on high you and below, in every direction, in every inflection, still you, however you, only you, ever you, 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 and thank you.
Hi, y'all. Can you hear me? Oh, I can't see you. I am a daughter of Laura Kasischke. This despite me not being a woman, not quite. And despite my constant sense that Laura is unaware that she has so many daughters. This despite me working to tell Laura many times now over the past 5 or so years how much her daughter I am. I have told her how alone I stood in many rooms with her poems, alone inside my body, just having been violated by gaze or by force, alone in cities to which I had never before been, in which I knew no one, and there with me were Laura's poems and Laura. I have reminded Laura of a story she told and a story she has specifically instructed me never to repeat. Of course, I am a daughter, and like any daughter, I will defy this instruction. She told that during her graduate years at the same institution where she was now my instructor, she was at work on poems no one wanted to hear, poems that made no sense to anyone but her. She told that her peers maybe believed she was deluded. She told of her supposed delusion, that she was a genius. She believed her work was valuable because it was valuable to her. This was a delusion, to believe a woman was genius. To be a woman and believe yourself valuable. She told that the delusion protected her for years. It made her immune. It did not matter what others thought. Laura's poems were valuable because they were valuable to Laura. And the instant she spoke it, this delusion wrapped itself around me like a glamour. I wore it every day I lived in Michigan attending graduate school. And it wrapped itself around me long before she ever said it near me. And it wraps itself around me every day since, days at my desk job where I struggle to find the language that will render me understood, and nights, now that my first book is done, where I have no words left. I hold this glamour close. Where I am inscrutable, I am whole. Language is my double-edged sword. I am valuable. I am genius. Laura is here, and she is embarrassed. I am saying this word genius. She is embarrassed that I am calling out her genius by name. But Laura was the first poet I ever read to acknowledge the abject failure of English, maybe even of language, the invention itself, to include or describe the realities of women. Which is not to say that language is exclusionary and women are left out in particular, but rather that English, maybe even language, the tool itself, fails abjectly to reflect reality, fails to accurately reflect time or space. Laura's genius lies in absorbing the shock of this profound failure with which any thinking speaker or writer must every day reckon, and in wielding our failed language expertly, almost imperceptibly, in a way that is absolutely new. Acknowledging or pointing out this failure was, of course, too simple for Laura, too easy, not even the point. The point was to make something absolutely new, something genius. This is the subtle redetermining and undermining of language itself that has been the work of Laura's life, the gift she has generously shared. But Laura, I hope you are not embarrassed that I am talking about womanhood. To gender your inventions of language would be to diminish the glamour of your genius, the achievement of this inestimable work you've given us. I want you to know I am not a daughter because these poems gave words to my existence, and my mother's, and her mother's, and stood beside me in the loneliest, most languageless moments of my life, and pronounced their own self-termed genius in a world that cannot bear a woman genius, and in so doing gave me a path. Laura, I am calling myself daughter because your work has dared me to describe the world accurately, as I know it, unflinchingly, generously, without understanding loss or failure as impediments to vision. And because I accept this, your challenge, to be my own genius. Tonight, it is my honor to bring you to the stage in celebration of your own real genius before an audience who can and does recognize it. Please join me in celebrating the publication of the brilliant Where Now and in welcoming the brilliant Laura Kasischke. Thank you.
Thank you. I did tell Lauren and the class in which I revealed that I had to convince myself throughout graduate school that I was a genius, and that they ought to do that too, that they needed to think of themselves as geniuses, not to tell anyone that they were thinking of themselves as geniuses, and therefore never to tell anyone that I had just told them that I had believed that myself to be a genius. So it's, but I'm not embarrassed. Thank you, Lauren, that was really amazing. And it's another amazing thing is to see one's student be a genius. I mean, you know, and to remember the moment that I realized that, unlike myself, she was. And so this is her book. I just want you to know that I borrowed this copy from Lauren because my own copy is very clean, and hers is all gray and dirty. I'm going to read the first poem in the book. It's a mother poem, or no, I guess it's the second poem in the book, Mother's Day, and to give you an idea of what Lauren's work is like. Mother's Day. In her backyard, my mother is hurling rocks at other people's houses, surrounded by shovels and flowers, flinging dirt, screaming and searching for her husband. Everyone is her husband. Windows, fence, telephone pole, sun, gray dog, man walking gray dog, blades of grass, seeds of grasses yet unborn. He has to be around here somewhere. He has to tell us why. Hey, things don't just get better after a while. You have to pick up every shovel and keep turning the ground. You have to move soil until your hands curdle. The new spring sun itself is a weapon, an enemy, is precision. They will tell you it's wrong to keep shoveling, but shovel forever. We all do. This is not your husband speaking. I am here. Thank you. That's Lauren's book. She won the AWP award. I saw it coming. I'm a genius for looking at other people's geniuses. Well, I think I have a couple other students who might be here tonight, Kate and Jared, and also I believe that my agent for my fiction, Lisa Bankoff, might be here, and she is the longest standing literary person in my life. Or even entity, now that my cat died, that has been with me on the journey the whole way. And so I just wanted to say that about her, too, if she's here. She's my agent for fiction. Poets don't get agents because somehow agents don't want to work really hard to get the free contributors copy that you work for years to get your poem published in. You have to split it anyway, like at least tear out a few pages. So. Although she has been with me through even less profitable projects over the years, for which I'm incredibly grateful. So I'm going to read for Lauren a mother poem of my own. It's called Binoculars, and to me, everything is very miraculous seeing it with binoculars because I'm incredibly nearsighted, and I can't, I've tried to wear, but I mean, I can see, I could read anything if it's up near my eyes. But when I drive or see a movie, I have to wear glasses, but I can't wear bifocals. They make me fall down. So I did try really hard. I know you have to get used to them, but 2 or 3 years you should be able to get used to them. I'm not going to. So when I look at things through binoculars, it's always it's a really different world than it is from the one I see through my eyes. This is called Binoculars. This bird on the other side of my binoculars, the cold life light around its mind, which is never meant to be seen this clearly by a human being. Still standing decades later in a corridor, crying, having run from the room, unable to watch my mother die. So there she is instead for the rest of my life. This bird, my husband says it is a flicker, pretending not to be staring straight back into my eye. So I wrote some time ago, I was thinking about having watched beauty pageants when I was younger, and how not really remembering why it was that I felt so sorry for the one who would be picked Miss Congeniality, but I felt her bitterness, and I felt angry for her, and I thought, I mean, that's not what she wanted, to be Miss Congeniality. She wanted to be Miss America or Miss Universe. She did not want to be Miss Congeniality. So that, why not, Miss Wallflower or Miss Dental Hygiene or something. Like, you just give everybody an award. That's what we would do now. My son, I remember him walking off a stage in kindergarten with every single child had an "I'm number one" sticker on their shirts. So anyway, I started to think of some other beauty queens and what their titles would mean to them, and what they would think of them. And so this is Miss Post-Apocalypse. The shoes in the garden seemed to know me by my name, emptied, all of them, except for the whispering of the breeze as it blew over the emptiness and loosened their tongues. Girl, where are all your trashy little daydreams now? Oh, my face on the page of a magazine curled up in the fire. Me, smiling on a big TV, worshiping a box of Tide. I couldn't bring myself to walk home beneath that monstrous cloud. I went back to the factory instead. I walked for miles, but the gate was locked. From somewhere inside, I could hear the last man on earth curse the last card as he drew it from the deck. And so this is Miss Estrogen. To have been a storm in a suit of armor, or the hound tied up outside as the fox slipped quivering through the field. To have been fever in an envelope mailed to a fire, while a man in the bedroom shouted, having mortally wounded himself while sharpening his own knife. Like unpredictable furniture for many years, she has her period, she's madly in love, leave her alone, she's out of her mind. Or like a red carpet rolled through a forest ending at an ocean. What will become of your life without such desire? To have been the wind in the kitchen, which blew the plates and bowls from the cupboards as the oven door lolled open, or a dormouse in a wine glass, such sacred fury. Was it meaningless? Pageant in a matchbox, all the mirrors and tiaras locked up in a vault, as I scaled in my satin robe the prison walls, ran straight into the burning church in my burning stilettos. And then so many bewildered, dusty knickknacks on a shelf, for sale, curios, everything must go. Once someone nodded in my direction as I did my job. She's the temporary girl here, meaning me. Once someone pointed and said, "Look at that wild bird in that tree." I looked, too late. It had flown away, to have been that bird and to become that tree. And this is a misconsolation for emotional damages. When the embarrassment began, no one could see it. It lived in the closet, the basement, the attic, the brain. It was a moth at first, and then it was the hole a moth had made. It had to do with unemployment. No, who cared that my father couldn't work? It had to do with the boy next door who'd seen my mother drunk, whose own mother had explained to him that it wasn't our fault we were poor. No, it had been born in another country. It had come to this one on a boat. It couldn't speak the language. It had left a wolf on the other shore, a tame wolf. Someone had beaten the wildness out of it with kindness and a stick. It had to do with paradox, that space was transparent and also dense. It had to do with Einstein, the curvature of the world in a third dimension. It couldn't take the contradiction. Woke one morning as a careless American girl, mouth stuffed with pink fluff, when she opened it. For centuries, nothing but pleasant inanities came out. Inanities? Inanities. So I should have practiced that or looked that up on the internet, I guess. And so finally, I will end this beauty pageant sequence with miscongeniality. There's a name given after your death and a name you must answer to while you're alive. Like flowers, my friends, nodding, nodding. My enemies, like space, drifting away. They praised my face, my enunciation, the power I freely relinquished, and the fires burning in the basements of my churches, and the pendulum swinging above my towers, and my heart, which was a Boy Scout, lost for years in a forest, and my soul, although the judges said it weighed almost nothing, for goodness had devoured it. They praised my feet, the shoes on my feet on the floor, and then the sense of despair I evoked with my smile, the song I sang, the speech I gave about peace in praise of the war. Oh, they could not grant me the title I wanted, so they gave me the title I bore, and stubbornly refused to believe I was dead, long after my bloody mattress had washed up on the shore. So I'll move on now from that obsession. This is called The Hole, but it's W-H-O-L-E. Although it could have been the other one, I think, a little bit. I made the mistake of watching on YouTube surgery taking place, and it was upsetting. And it made me really think about why, it's not just to keep our organs inside of us, that we have the skin over us. It's also so that we don't have to see each other's organs because, it would be just impossible to eat or, procreate or anything if we could see that, what we have going on inside there. And then, so I've never been a surgeon, obviously, so I don't, but I was thinking about, what surgeons know that we don't know that's behind our skin, and if they think about that, if there are any surgeons here, you can tell me later. But I've been a waitress, and I know that there are things that go on in the kitchen or that you, as a person eating in a restaurant, don't want to see, are really lucky you didn't have to see either. So, sorry. The whole. The surgeon peels the man away from the man to get a look at the whole throbbing thing of him. The slick little change purses, the seaweed, his featherless birds moistly dreaming, the rubied globes, but also the mossy blades and edges, the rotting branches hanging low with soggy leaves, and then one velvet tail curled around a pulp pink stone, right next to the fetal totalitarians, their shallow breathing, the sticky eyelids of a forgotten kitten, and that girl at Woodstock, too young to be there, it seemed, lost in the rainstorm in the dark among the demons, so that the faster she ran, the faster the tentacles sprang out of the mud to snag her ankles, her skinny thighs, slippery with blood and spit. The rose bloated in the bowl at the center of the great aunt's table, a cockroach crushed beneath the bridegroom's heel, a pearl fallen off the wedding dress, swallowed by a baby girl, the stippled button snipped from the suit coat of the eldest son in his coffin, pocketed by his brother. Then the shameful, rubbery secret at the center of us all, which, for this man, long since slipped into the gut of an iridescent fish, faceless, floating here now in this thickened ocean between today's patient's gray-eyed tumor, eyelashed, blushing, and his liver, mucus gleaming, the whole of it, just trying to be polite, as when the in-laws would arrive on Sunday mornings unannounced in their church clothes at 1 o'clock in the afternoon while we were still sleeping off the night before, the door opening very wide, hi, as if none of it had come as a surprise, because nature simply couldn't figure out another way to make us, frankly, there being so many things that no one wants to see. The gallbladder, for instance, the spleen, the intestines gathered as a sodden bouquet of carnations some days, and a roiling nest of shining snakes on other days. Or the cook in the kitchen, pinching the skin off the surface of the scalded hollandaise with his filthy fingernails. Oh, the waitress knows, and ladles the sauce over your eggs Benedict anyway, and the surgeon knows, sews you closed. And this one I would like to dedicate to the wonderful high school students who I'm sure are much better high school students than I was when I was a high school student that we talked to before the reading here. But this is like, I'm not setting myself up as a role model or anything, but you should be a role model for me. But this is what I learned in 9th grade. Always it's early winter, and you can always see through the Venetian blinds that you are floating and lost in a classroom made of mist, and that the false flattery of certain groups of girls is a feast of pure sugar that you must eat with your eyes closed while you swallow down its spoonfuls along with your flatterer's smiles. And you'll do it. Tropism equals a natural inclination. The roots grow down, the bird flies up. In some future, my husband will run toward the accident to see whether we can help, while I'll stand frozen on the sidewalk, covering my eyes with my hands. But that was just biology, and Mrs. Anders liked me. Elsewhere, there's a number that is not the phone number of a friend, but which I'm told I have to memorize, for without this number, the whole civilization will have to end, and I might never go on to 10th grade, remaining forever in 9th. God, how hard Mr. Nestor was trying in his raging kindness and shiny ties to teach us what it meant to designate the ratio of the circumference of a circle to its diameter and to call it pi. But this was dummy math. Some of us were sleeping, some of us were high, some of us were so desperate and confused that we were weeping. Surely he wasn't serious. We would never flunk or die. Surely one day a cure could be found for the kind of cancer my mother had, and then there would no longer be this need for math. Surely some researcher at some place like Harvard, a place I've been assured I'll never see, will discover this eventually. And even if a cure for math cannot be found, can math not simply be destroyed? This is the greatest country in the world. Why must its children suffer under pi? Cannot a scapegoat be slaughtered on an altar, as in the Bible, or an entire civilization in the past? May we not bomb it, invade it, steal its oil, or set its oil wells on fire at least? To my fellow soldiers, dummies, all of us, ruthless and proud of it, I said, we will spare their children if we can, of course, but only if they renounce their god of pie. Yes, in another year, I would learn of love from reading about Daisy and Jay. But in 9th grade, I learned about hatred. How to raise an army in my imagination, how to dress it in bright uniforms with hierarchical stripes, how to spray the peaceful valleys of my enemies with pesticides until it rained poisonous butterflies onto their flesh from the skies. And then, sweet Jesus, after it had already been memorized, to be told that 3.14159 is not quite pi, because pi is irrational and transcendent, so pi might just go on, or not go on, like 9th grade or civilization, which also began and ended in Babylon. Thank you. I sense that I have some fellow math, well, we weren't politically correct back then. Even those of us who were taking dummy math called it dummy math, and the teachers had it might have even said that in the course book for all I know. And we didn't care. We were just happy to not have to take math with those other kids who were in that other class. We had no idea what they were doing over there. So this is kind of the flip side of motherhood, I guess, that I'm gonna read about now. I used to read this poem all the time when I would go do readings, and my son was little and he was at home, and it was kind of like a charm to keep him from harm. I didn't mean for that to rhyme, but I did. Well, and after I'd had a baby, and maybe others have had this experience, my life was full of products that I had no idea had ever even existed, and I could remember, not having a baby and going through the grocery store and seeing those women going down the baby aisle looking at those little jars of food and the diapers and just thinking, oh, that will never happen to me. But then it did, and I had all these things, and it seemed for a long time that everything that I bought for my son, every toy or every pacifier, everything had on it the disclaimer, do not leave baby unattended, and then manufacturer's warning, as if there must be like a lot of parents who think they could buy a Frisbee for their kid and go to Paris for the weekend or something. But as soon as I had the baby, I realized I could not leave it unattended, and I didn't need any warning. So this is, I wrote, do not leave baby unattended, manufacturer's warning. There is a maker who refuses to be sued, a presence among us which does not wish to be believed in or leaned on or seen. He drops a small seed in the earth, fruitful, dutiful, blind, and it is me. But the earth around it is also me. He names me this one's mother, and there will never be any other who could share a liability, if anything, if something. The unspeakable lodges itself like a boiling coin of blood on the tongue. Even if I die, this one is mine. My faith is a dove asleep in the slaughterhouse eaves. My attention is a net sown of smoke and weight. Even if I died, my eyes would have to be always open underground or blinking in the sky. Whoever you are, up all night, embroidering warnings and disclaimers on our things, sleep easy, please. I cannot sue you. I cannot even die. Some nights are darker than trees. The sky and their hair breathes. There is no one in this house when the lights are out but the great blameless maker and the child and the mother attending these. My husband rightly sometimes asks, where am I in that poem? And I'm like, you just were not like emotionally that much help. I don't know. No offense. Like, it's a great guy, but so here's another the flip side of I'm not in 9th grade anymore in this poem, and this is as many of my poems are, this happened, and the young woman who I called an ambulance for, she's probably still paying off that ambulance and still remembering me. So this is called For the Young Woman I Saw Hit by a Car While Riding Her Bike. I'll tell you up front, she was fine, although she left in an ambulance because I called 911. And what else can you do when they've come for you with their sirens and lights and you're young and polite, except get into their ambulance and pretend to smile? Thanks, she said to me before they closed her up. They even tucked her bike in there, not one bent spoke on either tire. But I was shaking and sobbing too hard to say goodbye. I imagine her telling her friends later, "It hardly grazed me, but this lady who saw it went crazy." I did. I was molecular. While even the driver who hit her did little more than roll his eyes, while a trucker stuck at the intersection, wolfing down a swan sandwich behind the wheel, sighed. Someone touched me on the shoulder and asked, "Are you all right?" Over in 10 seconds, she stood, all blonde, shook her wings like a little cough. "Are you okay?" someone else asked me uneasily, as if overhearing my heartbeat and embarrassed for me that I was made of such gushing meat in the middle of the day on a quiet street. They should have put her in the ambulance, not me. Laughter, shit happens. To be young, to shrug it off. But sweet thing, take pity. One day you too may be an accumulation of regrets, catastrophes, a clay animation of Psalm 73. But as for me, my feet, no, it will be Psalm 48. They saw it, and so they marveled. They were troubled and hasted away. Today, you don't remember the way you called my name so desperately 1,000 times, tearing your hair and your clothes on the floor, and the nurse who denied your morphine so that you had to die that morning under a single sheet without me in agony. But this time I was beside you. I waited, and I saved you. I was there. I'm going to read just 2.5 more poems, I think, or something like that. This one is called Clown, and I live in a small town outside of Ann Arbor, sort of between Detroit and Ann Arbor, and we have maybe you all have this too. I mean, there's one in Manhattan here that we have a clown, like a local clown. She goes around and does birthday parties and stuff. So you drive around town, you see, I don't mean for this to rhyme too, but you see this clown, you know, and she'll be dressed as a clown with a big nose and, you know, curly red hair and lots of, you know, paint on her face, and she'll just be, you know, filling her car with gas or looking, looking for apples at the grocery store. So so Big Boy might be a Midwest thing. It's a restaurant known for its strawberry pies in the summer, and it's Big Boy that stands outside wearing an apron. And so anyway, we have one also, along with a clown and a car wash in my town. And I had gone there with my son, who was about 3 years old at the time, and he he'd seen clowns before, but he'd never seen one just coming in to the Big Boy to have a sandwich or something. And it was an epiphany for him of some sort, I think. So this is called Clown. It was summer, and the clown had come to the same restaurant to which we'd come for a piece of strawberry pie. Big white smile, wig of fire. The sun had begun to set with a piece of gold in its mouth. There were devils in the dumpsters eating flies. "What's that?" the 3-year-old asked. I said, "She is a clown." Time had begun to pass so fast I felt as if the weekly newspaper came to our house every day. Yet I had a photograph of myself in which I'd blown my bangs back, wanting to have wings like an angel or Farrah Fawcett, when what I had was hair that made me look in this photograph like a girl who'd lived for a while in another century on a distant planet. Someday my children would laugh. "She's not a woman," the 3-year-old said of the clown. There were white seeds blowing around in the evening breeze without a plan, landing their fluff craft in the Big Boy parking lot onto the hoods of cars. A man puts a gun to your head and demands your child. What should you do? That's the kind of early summer night it was, the kind of night in which perhaps you have a last moment to look around and laugh at the child and the clown and the pie and the fact that if each atom could be collapsed into a sphere no bigger than its core, all of the Washington Monument could be crammed into a space no bigger than an eraser. How modest were your desires. And the order of things is true, a clown is last, but all of us are futile when it comes to want and stupid to look at in a restaurant. And so this poem I'm going to read, this is for my workshop that I met with yesterday, and this is for all of New York City. And also for the incredible honor of reading with Peter here and being introduced by Lauren and being in this space. I had never forgotten, so I won't pretend like I just remembered. But the first reading that I came to at the 92nd Street Y was to see Richard Fitzgerald read from his translation that had just come out of the Aeneid, except that I got here and he wasn't here because he had died, like maybe that day even, although maybe it had been a day or two before. We didn't have the internet then, so everyone couldn't be contacted immediately about these things. So it might have been a day or two before, but someone read for him, but he wasn't here. But I was seeing Robert Creeley and Gwendolyn Brooks and Adrienne Rich and Seamus Haney and read here, and even though I believed that I was a genius, I never sat out there thinking that I would one day be reading here, so it's very much comes as a surprise and an honor to be here. So thank you, Lauren, for the wonderful introduction, and Peter and the high school students, and also my workshop from yesterday. And this is for New York City. It's called, and thank you for 92nd Street Y bringing me here. This is, I was here with my son when he was little again, and we watched Rockefeller Plaza, the Christmas tree light up in a gigantic crowd we couldn't see over. We saw nothing, no tree, nothing. However, he was obsessed with Pokemon at the time, and there was a store that was selling, there was like the new Pokemon that everybody was gonna want to catch, have their mothers catch with their purses for you, was on display in this store. And I had thought at that time, there was something wrong with my kid. He was so obsessed with Pokemon, and there must be, it's just I'd failed already as a mother, until I got into that store and saw how many kids were just going even crazier than he was. And then for a minute there, I was able to make myself feel a little better and thought, oh, it's a boy thing, like just these little boys like that. And then I saw a little girl. She was about her mom, very pretty little girl. Her mom was holding her. She was maybe 3 years old. And the Pokemon was in this glass case with all these spotlights, the new ones, shining down on it, but it wasn't for sale yet. And the little girl was, her mom was holding her, and she had her fists up, and she was pounding on the glass, saying, "Break through the glass, break through the glass, break through the glass." While she just stared at that Pokemon, and everyone else was staring around it too. So anyway, that's my Rockefeller Plaza, or Plaza, as we would say in Michigan. So Rockefeller Plaza. So thank you so much for having me here. Rockefeller Plaza. How in 8th grade we got philosophy and began to discuss what it might mean if I were simply imagining you imagining me. But we each assumed the other one was the invented one, unless you truly did not exist, and so you simply humored me. I sure hope not. To think I could be alone here, not even on a darkling plain, just me concocting armies, far-off wars, all these newspaper accounts of my atrocities, not to mention all with my own eyes I've believed I've seen. Hawk on a golf course, and that rabbit seeming to sing. My mother pleading with me not to let the nurses eat her. Please, please. How could I allow such things to happen, even in a memory, if it's all just me? But then, of course, I think this would also mean that it was I who created a parent's love for a child. And who would it have been who placed and labeled in that museum all those ancient trinkets in that glass case but me? And for tinfoil and for cherries, you'd also have me to thank, it seems. And even for the thousands of you gathered here tonight because of me, each with your own face and name and waiting very patiently for the municipality to light your Christmas tree. Yes, all your voices, all this wonderment expressed in one massive human yawn, an emotional cloud issuing from all of us at once as its lights snap on. How good it was of you to be here to see it too, with me, not to be alone, not to witness such a thing without the rest of you, all of you, my beloveds, my dearest strangers, who so generously shared your awe with me, or so I let myself believe. Thank you very much.